You think you can fool a man like me? You're fired, you little thief!
You think you can fool a man like me? You're fired, you little thief! The billionaire's voice cut through the Miami heat like a blade. Guests froze, champagne glasses trembling in mid-air. Richard Harlow stood tall in his blue suit, every word dripping with anger and pride. In front of him, Marcus Reed, the driver he trusted for years, said nothing. The crowd whispered, cameras lifted. The mansion loomed behind them like a stage set for humiliation. Richard pointed toward the open trunk. "Pack your junk and get out of my sight." Marcus's eyes flicked toward the car, calm, silent. He nodded once and walked to the trunk. But when he lifted it open, Richard's face changed. The laughter stopped. Inside, something shone in the sunlight, something that made the billionaire's smile disappear. Before we begin this emotional story, tell us in the comments from which city you are watching, and don't forget to leave your like to keep following us. The driveway shimmered under the afternoon sun, every inch of marble reflecting the wealth that surrounded Richard Harlow's life. Guests murmured behind crystal flutes and golden smiles, pretending not to stare while doing exactly that. The party had been meant to celebrate another real estate triumph, a skyscraper deal worth billions, but now it had turned into something far more entertaining, a public execution. Marcus Reed stood still by the car, his hands clasped in front of him, his chest rising and falling slowly. The heat pressed down on him, but his stillness made him look carved from something stronger than flesh. The billionaire's voice thundered again, each syllable sharpened by humiliation. "You've embarrassed me in front of my clients. Do you have any idea what this means for you?" Marcus said nothing. His silence seemed to irritate Richard more than any word could. The guests shifted uncomfortably. Some smiled awkwardly, unsure whether to enjoy the scene or pretend outrage. Richard thrived in moments like these. He ruled through fear, not fairness. "Answer me," Richard barked, stepping closer. The polished shoes, the tailored suit, the scent of expensive cologne, everything about him screamed dominance. Marcus met his eyes briefly, then lowered them again, respectful but unyielding. "Sir," he said quietly, "I didn't take anything from you." The billionaire laughed, sharp, cruel, theatrical. "Oh, really? Then where's my watch? The Patek Philippe my wife gave me?" He turned toward the crowd, raising his hands as if presenting evidence. "It vanished this morning, and guess who was the only one with access to my study?" Gasps rippled through the guests. A few whispered Marcus's name. A woman near the fountain covered her mouth in mock sympathy. The social circle around Richard loved a scandal, especially one that didn't touch them. Marcus kept his tone calm. "If you allow me, I'll help you look for it." Richard's eyes flashed. "You think I'm stupid enough to let a thief back into my house?" He turned toward one of his assistants, Daniel, who stepped forward with an eager grin, holding a small velvet box. "We found this under the driver's seat, sir," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. The billionaire's mouth curled into a satisfied smile. He snatched the box and opened it. Inside, the missing watch gleamed. Whispers turned into a storm. The driver looked at it, eyes widening, not in guilt but in shock. "That's impossible," he murmured. "I never—" "Save it!" Richard interrupted. "You'll explain it to the police, after I make sure everyone here knows what kind of man you are." He stepped aside, gesturing grandly toward the car. "Go ahead, get your belongings. I want you off my property in 5 minutes." Marcus's throat tightened. He looked at the guests, the same people who used to greet him kindly, who once praised his discretion. Now their faces held judgment, amusement, pity. He nodded once, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, sir." The sun blazed against the polished hood as Marcus walked toward the trunk. His shoes clicked softly on the stone driveway, each step echoing in the heavy silence. Behind him, laughter tried to return, but couldn't. Something in his composure unsettled them, a quiet dignity that didn't fit the image of a guilty man. When Marcus reached the car, he placed his hand on the trunk handle and hesitated. His reflection stared back at him from the glossy surface, small but unbroken. He took a deep breath, steady and controlled. And as he lifted the trunk, a single metallic click sliced through the noise. Every conversation stopped. Richard watched, expecting fear, expecting tears. But Marcus only looked down, calm, measured, as if what he was about to reveal didn't belong to the guilty, but to the truth itself. The sun burned brighter, as if the Miami sky itself wanted to witness the scene. Every eye was fixed on the billionaire and the man he'd just destroyed. The soft clink of champagne glasses faded into the background, replaced by the slow, rhythmic pounding of Richard Harlow's expensive loafers as he paced beside the car. "Do you know how much this watch costs?" he demanded, holding it up for everyone to see. $180,000. My wife gave it to me when I closed the Manhattan deal. And you, he pointed at Marcus like a weapon. You thought you could slip it into your bag and walk away? Marcus's voice came out steady, almost too calm for the situation. I never touched that watch, sir. I clean your cars every morning, but I've never entered your study without permission. The guests murmured, watching him like a courtroom jury. Richard smiled coldly. You hear that? He's a good liar too. That's how they always start. Polite, obedient, pretending to be humble until they see a chance. Marcus looked up at him, eyes clear but tired. If I wanted to steal Mr. Harlow, I wouldn't still be driving your car after 5 years. The line hit harder than Richard expected. For a moment, his jaw tightened. He didn't like being reminded of time, the years people served him, the loyalty they gave before being discarded. Don't talk back to me, he snapped. You're lucky I'm not calling the police right now. He turned to Daniel, the assistant who had conveniently found the watch. Make sure his pay is cut off immediately, and call security. I don't want him setting foot here again. A ripple of laughter spread through the crowd. Some filmed discreetly, others whispered like vultures circling over something already dying. The Miami breeze carried the scent of ocean salt and perfume, a cruel contrast to the tension pressing on Marcus's chest. He looked toward the gate, where the guards stood watching. He could leave now, disappear quietly, but something in him resisted. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was exhaustion, or maybe he simply wanted to end this moment with his dignity intact. I've served your family since before your son could walk, he said quietly. I never asked for anything but respect. Richard's laughter returned, brittle and arrogant. Respect? You earn that with money, Marcus, not with loyalty. For the first time, Marcus's gaze hardened. The guests felt it, that subtle shift in the air when a man reaches the point of no return. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't move closer, he simply said, Then maybe that's why you don't have any. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The billionaire froze, stunned for a heartbeat, then stepped forward with fury glowing behind his eyes. Get out of my sight before I make you regret those words. Marcus nodded slowly. Don't worry, I was leaving anyway. He turned toward the car again, his movements deliberate, unhurried. The guests followed him with their eyes, as if something invisible was pulling them closer to the unfolding storm. Even Daniel shifted nervously now, glancing at Richard, unsure whether the performance had gone too far. Richard straightened his jacket, forcing a laugh. Let him go. He'll be begging for a job by the end of the week. But the laughter that followed was thinner this time, uncertain. People were starting to sense something, the imbalance, the cruelty. Marcus's silence wasn't weakness. It was something else. Something that made even the palm trees seem to hold their breath. When he reached the car again, Marcus opened the driver's door and reached for a small bag resting on the seat. He moved slowly, methodically, like a man performing the last act of a ritual he didn't choose. Then he closed the door and looked back toward the crowd. His expression had changed. No anger, no fear, just quiet resolve. He walked to the trunk, placed one hand on the edge, and whispered something only he could hear. The metallic latch clicked. The lid began to rise. And Richard Harlow, the man who owned everything, felt for the first time that day a sudden chill slide down his spine. No one spoke. The air around the mansion seemed to thicken, trapping every sound before it reached the sky. Marcus stood beside the open trunk, the light glinting across his uniform buttons. His hands didn't shake. His face revealed nothing. Only the faint reflection of palm trees swayed on the glossy black paint, as if nature itself was waiting for him to move. Richard Harlow's voice broke the silence. What are you waiting for? Take your things and get out. His tone tried to sound commanding, but there was something different in it now. A small tremor, almost invisible. Marcus didn't answer. He reached inside the trunk slowly, moving a few folded shirts, a pair of gloves, and a rolled-up towel. The ordinary items made the scene even stranger. There was no stolen jewelry, no hidden luxury, just the quiet belongings of a working man. The crowd whispered again, but softer this time. A few guests exchanged uncertain looks. Emily Harlow, Richard's wife, stood near the fountain, her glass of champagne untouched. Her eyes followed Marcus's movements carefully, as if searching for something Richard couldn't see. Richard forced a laugh. "Come on, people, don't look so serious. You'll see he's got more than a toothbrush in there." The laugh died before it reached anyone else. Marcus placed a small envelope on the ground beside his bag. It was worn, folded, marked by time. He hesitated before closing the trunk, then stopped, as if something inside had caught his attention. Richard noticed. "What is it? Hiding more surprises?" He took a step forward, his voice rising again. "Show us what's in there." Marcus didn't move. He stood still, his back to the crowd, the open trunk reflecting his silhouette. The wind brushed through the palm leaves, carrying the sound of the ocean from beyond the walls. For a moment it felt like the entire city had gone silent. When he finally spoke, his tone was calm but sharp. "I never took what's yours, Mr. Harlow, but you left something that doesn't belong to you." Richard frowned, his face hardening. "What are you talking about?" Marcus didn't reply. Instead, he leaned forward and placed both hands on the edge of the trunk, staring at what lay inside. He wasn't smiling, but there was a kind of quiet relief in his expression, the peace of someone who had carried a weight too long. Emily stepped closer. "Richard," she said softly, "maybe that's enough." But her husband brushed her off with a gesture. "No. He wants attention? Fine. Let him show everyone what's inside." Marcus exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that feels like the end of something. He looked over his shoulder, meeting Richard's eyes. The guests held their phones up again. This was no longer just gossip. It was spectacle. Then Marcus said quietly, "You should be the one opening it, sir." The billionaire's smirk faltered. The words hit like a small crack in a sheet of glass. Quiet, but deep. The crowd felt it too. Something unseen had shifted. Richard hesitated, glancing toward Daniel, then back at Marcus. The driver stepped aside, leaving space for him. "Go ahead," Marcus said. "You'll want to see it yourself." The Miami sun caught on the edge of the trunk. The reflection of the ocean shimmered across the car's surface, bright and cold. Richard's hand twitched once before reaching forward. Every guest leaned in, every breath hung suspended, and as his fingers touched the lid, a strange fear, small but undeniable, crept through the man who thought he feared nothing. Richard's fingers brushed the edge of the trunk, but he didn't lift it. The silence around him had grown thick, like invisible smoke pressing against his chest. The laughter was gone now, the smiles replaced by wary eyes and whispered doubts. "Open it," Marcus said quietly. His tone was not defiant but certain, the way truth sounds when it no longer needs to shout. The billionaire forced a smirk. "You think I'm afraid of your little act? Fine." He lifted the lid with a sudden jerk, the metallic hinges groaning under the tension. For a second he froze, not because of what he saw, but because of what he didn't expect to feel. His confidence slipped, barely perceptible, but enough for everyone to notice. The mask cracked. Inside the trunk, beneath folded clothes and the faint scent of car polish, sat a small silver box, polished, locked, out of place. The crowd leaned closer. Daniel whispered something to another guest. Emily's eyes widened. Richard swallowed. His lips parted, but no words came out. It was as if the air around that box carried a different weight, something personal, familiar. He blinked once, then twice, trying to disguise the sudden rush of heat behind his collar. "What's that?" Daniel asked. Richard forced a chuckle. "Just junk. Something he probably stole from another job." He looked at Marcus. "You enjoy hiding things, don't you?" Marcus didn't reply. He simply held Richard's gaze with the calm of a man who no longer feared consequences. The stillness unnerved everyone. It made Richard's words sound weaker, emptier. "Show us what's inside," one of the guests said, half drunk, half curious. "Come on, Richard, let's see the evidence." The billionaire hesitated. "It's nothing," he said quickly. "A trick. He's trying to embarrass me." "Embarrass you?" Marcus finally spoke, his voice even and quiet. "Sir, I've driven you for 5 years. I know what's in that box, and I never wanted to touch it." The words sliced through the air like glass. The crowd exchanged glances. Phones rose again, recording. Richard's expression hardened, but his eyes betrayed something else: fear. His breathing grew heavier. The afternoon heat felt suffocating now, beads of sweat tracing down his temple. Emily stepped closer, voice low but trembling. "Richard, what is it?" "Nothing," he snapped. The outburst echoed across the driveway. Birds scattered from the palm trees. Marcus didn't move. "You left it in the car after your trip to New York," he said softly. "You told me to lock it up until you came back." Gasps rippled through the guests. The scene had shifted. The once powerful man now stood cornered by his own words. Richard's glare was sharp enough to wound. "You think this little show will save you? You think they'll believe you over me?" But even as he spoke, his voice faltered. The crowd wasn't laughing anymore. Some of them stepped back. Others whispered, "Why is he so nervous?" Marcus straightened his posture, his calm almost unnerving. "You wanted me gone," he said, "because you were afraid I might open it." For the first time, Richard didn't respond. His mouth moved, but no sound came. The billionaire who once controlled every room now looked like a man trapped inside one. He turned toward Daniel, eyes desperate. "Call security," he muttered, voice shaking slightly. But no one moved. The guests watched in silence as Marcus stepped closer to the open trunk, the silver box gleaming between them. And when Richard's hand instinctively reached to close the lid, Marcus stopped him with a quiet, steady voice. "Maybe it's time you remember what you hid, sir." Richard's breath came uneven now, shallow and forced. His hand hovered above the silver box like it might bite. Around him, the crowd had gone utterly still. The party music from the terrace had faded into the background, replaced by the restless clicking of cameras and the distant sound of waves breaking beyond the mansion gates. Marcus didn't move. His calm presence seemed to fill the space between them, quiet but unrelenting. "Go ahead," he said softly. "It's yours." Richard's eyes darted toward Emily. She stood frozen, her hand gripping her glass so tightly it trembled. "Richard," she whispered, "what's inside that thing?" He ignored her. His pride was louder than her fear. "You want a show?" he said to the crowd. "Fine, let's give them one." He yanked the box out of the trunk and placed it on the marble driveway. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Gasps spread through the guests. The box gleamed in the sunlight, flawless and heavy, engraved with faint initials. R.H. Marcus stepped back, giving him space. "You left it under the back seat 2 weeks ago," he said quietly. "I locked it in the trunk just like you told me. You said you'd pick it up when no one was around." A tremor passed through Richard's expression. He clenched his jaw and crouched beside the box, pretending control he no longer had. "I have nothing to hide," he said, though his voice betrayed the opposite. He pressed the small latch and the lock popped with a sharp, metallic click. For a long moment, he just stared at it. Emily took a step forward, whispering again, "Richard, please." He ignored her and lifted the lid. Inside lay a stack of neatly folded envelopes, sealed with wax. Beneath them, a few flash drives and a thin leather folder bound by a gold clip. No jewelry, no cash, just paper. But even from where they stood, the guests could see the official seals, the stamped signatures, government, corporate. Richard's hand trembled as he reached for one. "What is that?" Daniel asked, his voice cracking. Richard didn't answer. His lips pressed into a thin line as he stared down at a familiar logo, one that should never have been seen outside his private office. Marcus watched silently. "I told you, sir. I never stole from you. I was keeping something safe. For you." The irony sliced through the humid air. The billionaire stood abruptly, slamming the box shut. "Enough, this ends now." He turned toward his assistant. "Call the police. I want this man off my property." Daniel hesitated. The crowd didn't move. The silence was heavier now, pressing against every chest. Someone whispered, "He looks scared." Richard pointed at Marcus, shouting louder, "He broke into my office. He planted this." But the panic in his voice betrayed him. For the first time, the guests didn't believe him. They looked at Marcus, calm, steady, grounded, and then back at Richard, whose face had turned pale beneath the Miami sun. Emily stepped closer, her voice barely a breath. "Richard, why does that box have government seals?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Richard's mouth opened, but nothing came out. The silence that followed was unbearable, the kind that swallows reputations whole. Marcus lowered his gaze, his tone quiet but firm. "I think they deserve to know what you were really hiding, sir." Richard's eyes widened, panic flashing behind them. "Don't!" he hissed. But Marcus didn't move toward the box. Not yet. He simply looked around the circle of frozen faces and said, almost to himself, "The truth doesn't need to scream. It just waits to be seen." The box sat open again under the blazing Miami sun, its contents no longer just rumor or mystery. Richard Harlow's trembling hands hovered above the stack of documents, the corner of one envelope fluttering in the breeze like a quiet accusation. No one dared speak first. The guests, once amused spectators, now looked like jurors waiting for a verdict. Emily's face had gone pale. Daniel shifted his weight uneasily, eyes darting between his boss and the silver box that glimmered like gilt made visible. Marcus stood still, arms at his sides. His calmness had turned from humility into quiet strength. "You might want to explain, sir," he said softly. Richard tried to laugh, but it came out strained and hollow. "You think a few papers mean anything? This is nothing. Fake. Obviously fake." Marcus's gaze stayed locked on him. "Then open one. Show them." The crowd murmured. Someone whispered, "Why doesn't he?" Another voice answered, "Because he can't." Richard's jaw clenched. He grabbed one of the envelopes and tore it open with a violent motion, pulling out a few sheets. His eyes flicked over the first page, and something in him broke. The color drained from his face. Emily took a step closer. "Richard, what is it?" He didn't respond. The paper slipped slightly in his shaking hand, revealing the letterhead. Federal Banking Commission. A seal. A date. Signatures. Marcus spoke quietly, each word steady as stone. "That's the report you said disappeared 2 years ago. The one about the offshore accounts." Gasps filled the air. Guests looked at each other, whispering, stunned. Richard dropped the paper as if it burned him. "You don't know what you're talking about." His voice rose, desperate now. "He stole those files from my office. He's setting me up." But Marcus didn't flinch. "You told me to drive you to a storage unit outside the city," he said. "You carried that box yourself. I remember because you made me sign a paper saying I'd never speak of it." Emily's eyes widened. "Is that true?" Richard looked at her, sweat tracing down his temple. "Don't listen to him. He's lying. You know me, Em." But her expression had changed. There was fear now, not of Marcus, but of the man she'd married. One of the guests, a real estate partner, picked up one of the envelopes that had fallen to the ground. His voice trembled as he read aloud. "Transaction record, Cayman Holdings Limited, under the name of Richard Harlow." The murmurs turned to gasps. Phones lifted again, flashes catching the billionaire's frozen face. Richard lunged forward, grabbing the papers back. "Stop! You have no right to read that!" Marcus didn't move. He only said, "They have every right. You made your fortune from them. They deserve to know who you really are." The words hit harder than any slap. Richard's breathing quickened. The powerful CEO who once ruled every boardroom now stood cornered by a man he'd called a thief. Emily whispered, tears forming in her eyes. "Richard, what did you do?" He didn't answer. His silence was the loudest thing there. Marcus turned slightly, looking at the crowd, then back at his former boss. "You fired me for stealing," he said quietly. "But maybe you were just afraid I'd find out what you were stealing." A hush fell over the driveway. Somewhere beyond the gates, a siren wailed faintly, as if the city itself had decided it was time for truth to arrive. Richard took a step back, his voice cracking. "You don't understand, it's not what it looks like." But it was too late. Everyone had already seen enough. The siren grew louder, winding its way through the palm-lined streets until the blue and red lights flickered against the mansion's white facade. Guests stepped back instinctively, their glittering outfits reflecting the glow of authority. The irony was impossible to miss. A billionaire's party, now surrounded by police cars. Richard's voice cracked as he tried to regain control. "This is all a mistake. Someone call my lawyer, now!" He waved at Daniel, but the young assistant didn't move. His face was pale, frozen between loyalty and self-preservation. Two uniformed officers walked up the driveway, confusion flickering in their eyes as they took in the scene. A trembling billionaire, a calm chauffeur, a crowd dressed in silk and diamonds, and an open trunk that seemed to breathe tension. Marcus stepped back to give them space. His voice was steady, polite. "Officers, I think you should see this." One of them, Detective Lopez, crouched beside the box, his trained eyes scanning the papers scattered on the marble. "Where did this come from?" Marcus gestured toward Richard. "It's his. I was ordered to keep it locked away. Until today." Richard's face twisted. "Lies! He planted it!" He turned to the crowd, desperate. "You all saw it. He's been trying to humiliate me." But no one met his gaze. The silence from his guests was deafening. These were people who had toasted his success, signed his contracts, envied his empire. Now, they stepped back as if distance could wash their names clean. Lopez flipped through a few of the papers, eyebrows lifting. "These are federal records. Financial transfers, company accounts, signatures." He glanced at Richard. "Sir, your name appears on all of these." "I can explain," Richard said quickly. His voice trembled, but his pride forced him to keep talking. "This is all business strategy, confidential deals, nothing illegal." "Then you won't mind if we verify that," Lopez replied, standing. His tone was calm, almost too calm, the kind that comes from seeing lies dressed in expensive suits. Richard's laughter broke, loud and cracked. "You think I'd risk everything for some stupid offshore accounts?" Marcus finally spoke, his words soft but cutting. "You already did." The sound hit harder than any punch. Emily stepped closer, tears brimming. "Richard, please stop, they have proof." He turned to her, eyes wild. "You believe them over me. Over me." She didn't answer. The silence between them was a verdict. Lopez nodded to his partner. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to stay where you are." The guests gasped. A few stepped back farther, clutching their purses, as if guilt might be contagious. Richard laughed again, but it came out hollow. "You can't arrest me here. This is my house, my party." Marcus's gaze softened, not in pity but in quiet finality. "It was your world, Mr. Harlow, until you built it on other people's lives." The crowd whispered, the phrase echoing like a prayer and a curse. Detective Lopez looked down at the papers once more, then closed the box carefully. "We'll need to take this as evidence." Richard tried to speak again, but his voice failed. The arrogance that once filled every word had drained out of him, leaving only panic. He looked at Marcus, the man he'd fired, the one he'd humiliated in front of everyone. But the driver didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply nodded, quiet and composed, as if the universe had finally balanced its books. The sirens faded into a low hum. The billionaire stood alone in the middle of his own empire, surrounded not by admirers, but by truth. For a long time, no one moved. The party lights flickered softly across the marble driveway, reflecting off the abandoned glasses of champagne. The air was heavy with disbelief, like the city itself was holding its breath. Richard stood frozen near the trunk, his once perfect suit now clinging to him with sweat. His chest rose and fell in uneven bursts. He looked like a man searching for a way out of a room with no doors. Detective Lopez spoke quietly into his radio, his partner gathering the documents. Around them, the guests stayed silent, watching the fall of a man they had once called genius. The whispers that followed were no longer admiration. They were pity. Marcus remained near the car, his posture steady, eyes calm. His hands were clasped behind his back, as if this moment wasn't about revenge but release. Richard finally turned to him, voice shaking. "You planned this, didn't you? You wanted to destroy me." Marcus didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was almost too quiet to hear. "No, sir, you destroyed yourself. I just stopped helping you hide it." The line cut through the silence like a blade. A few guests gasped. Emily looked down, tears slipping past her lashes. Richard took a step closer, anger flickering again, a dying flame refusing to go out. "You think this makes you better than me? You're just a driver." Marcus met his gaze without flinching. "I was your driver, yes, but I never forgot how to be a man." The simplicity of it stunned the crowd. A few guests lowered their phones, ashamed to keep filming. Others turned away, unable to watch what pride looked like when it shattered. Richard's mouth trembled. He tried to find words, but all that came out was bitterness. "You think anyone will care about your little moral victory? I'll fix this. I'll call my people." "Your people?" Marcus interrupted gently. "They're the ones walking away right now." Richard turned. It was true. One by one, the guests were leaving. No goodbyes, no sympathy. Even Daniel had disappeared into the mansion, avoiding eye contact. The empire was dissolving before everyone's eyes, faster than the ice melting in their drinks. Only Emily remained. She walked slowly toward Marcus, her expression torn. "Marcus, did you know this all along?" He shook his head. "I didn't want to know. But lies have a way of finding you, even when you look away." Her eyes softened. "You should have told me." He hesitated, then said quietly, "Would you have believed me?" She looked down. No words, only silence, the kind that admits the truth. Richard's voice broke again, quieter now. "You think they'll forgive you for this?" Marcus looked at him one last time. "Forgiveness isn't what I wanted. I just wanted you to see what respect looks like." The wind moved through the palm trees, cool and sharp. The Miami skyline glimmered in the distance, unaware that a king had just fallen. Detective Lopez approached. "Sir, we'll need you to come with us." Richard didn't resist. His shoulders sagged, his pride gone. As the officers led him toward the gate, the crowd parted in silence. Marcus stood by the car, the trunk still open, the last traces of sunlight fading across the hood. He didn't smile. He simply closed the trunk gently, not as a symbol of victory, but as an ending. The sound of it echoed through the driveway. A single, final click. The police cars remained parked along the circular driveway, their lights flashing softly against the night that had begun to fall over Miami. The golden glow from the mansion's windows flickered across the marble floor, now littered with confetti, half-empty glasses, and the remnants of a celebration turned tragedy. Marcus stood near the car, watching in silence as Richard Harlow was guided toward the back of a patrol vehicle. The billionaire didn't fight anymore. His head was down, his steps slow. The cuffs around his wrists glinted under the flashing lights, a cruel reflection of all the luxury he'd once worn so proudly. Detective Lopez approached Marcus, holding the silver box now sealed inside an evidence bag. "We'll take it from here," he said, his tone respectful. "There's enough here to open a serious investigation." Marcus nodded. "That's all I wanted, for the truth to be seen." Lopez studied him for a moment. "You could have hidden this, you know. You could have walked away, disappeared, kept your silence." Marcus looked toward the crowd, what was left of it. Most of the guests had gone, leaving only a few hushed faces and the faint hum of engines in the distance. "Sometimes silence becomes guilt," he said. "I've been quiet long enough." The detective nodded slowly, almost in admiration, then turned to escort the evidence back to his car. Emily stood a few steps away, her arms crossed, eyes glistening. She looked nothing like the glamorous woman from earlier. Her face was stripped of pride, of makeup, of certainty. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I swear I didn't know what he was doing." Marcus believed her. "I know," he said gently. "He kept his secrets well." She took a hesitant step forward. "You could have ruined him years ago. Why now?" Marcus's gaze lingered on the streetlights, his reflection faint in the polished hood of the Mercedes. "Because dignity doesn't live forever in silence. It waits until the moment it's forced to speak." Her eyes filled with tears. "He wasn't always like this." Marcus gave a faint, sad smile. "Power changes people, but losing it shows who they really are." The faint sound of a car door slamming broke their silence. Richard was inside the patrol car now, head leaning against the window. For the first time, he didn't look like a billionaire or a villain, just a man facing the weight of his choices. Marcus watched as the police car rolled slowly down the driveway, its lights fading into the night. The ocean wind returned, carrying the soft rustle of the palms. For a moment, it almost felt peaceful. Emily stepped closer again. "What will you do now?" He looked toward the city skyline, where lights shimmered over the water. Maybe drive again, he said quietly. But this time, not for anyone who thinks they own the road. A faint smile touched her lips, the first sign of grace since everything had fallen apart. You deserved better, Marcus. He glanced at her kindly. We all do. We just forget it sometimes. She looked away, and for a long moment, neither spoke. The air was filled only with the sound of waves and the quiet hum of justice settling into the night. Marcus reached for his old bag, slung it over his shoulder, and turned toward the gate. He didn't look back at the mansion. He didn't need to. Some endings don't need applause and only silence. The night had grown quiet. The lights from the mansion dimmed one by one, leaving the grand estate in a kind of peaceful ruin, a shell of its former glory. Only the faint hum of the ocean and the distant city lights remained, flickering like reminders that life moves on, even after empires fall. Marcus walked down the empty street, his footsteps soft against the stone. He carried only his old canvas bag and the same calm that had carried him through humiliation, accusation, and truth. The Miami air smelled of salt and rain, the kind that always comes after a storm. Behind him, the echoes of the party had vanished. The world that had once laughed at him was now silent, not out of respect but out of realization. They had seen what pride looks like when stripped bare. They had seen what honesty looks like when it stands alone. A car slowed beside him. Detective Lopez leaned out the window. You sure you don't need a ride? Marcus smiled faintly. No, sir. I think I've done enough driving for tonight. Lopez gave a small nod. You did the right thing. Marcus's voice was low but firm. Doing the right thing doesn't always feel right at first, but it's lighter to carry than regret. The detective smiled, then drove off, his tail lights disappearing into the humid night. Marcus kept walking. The moonlight traced his shadow across the pavement, long and steady, the silhouette of a man who had nothing left to prove. He stopped near a bench overlooking Biscayne Bay. The city lights shimmered across the water, dancing like memories. He sat down, unbuttoned his collar, and let the breeze cool his skin. For the first time in years, his chest felt light. He thought of Richard Harlow, the power, the arrogance, the downfall. He didn't hate him. He pitied him. Because in the end, money can buy silence but not peace. And without peace, even the richest man lives like a prisoner. Footsteps approached. Emily stood a few feet away, her eyes swollen from crying, her hair loose in the wind. She didn't wear jewels now, only a simple dress that made her look human again. I wanted to thank you, she said softly, for not letting him drag you down with him. Marcus looked up, meeting her gaze. You don't have to thank me. I just didn't let him forget who he was. She nodded, tears glinting in the moonlight. What will you do next? He looked back at the water, his reflection mingling with the stars. Start over. Maybe somewhere quiet. I think I've had enough noise for one lifetime. Emily hesitated, then said, He used to say respect was bought. You proved it isn't. Marcus smiled gently. Respect isn't for sale, Mrs. Harlow. It's earned, one truth at a time. She stood there a moment longer, then walked away into the night, her figure fading into the city lights. Marcus remained on the bench, watching the waves roll in. He closed his eyes and whispered to the wind, as if to the ghosts of the night itself. Respect isn't something you take, it's something you live. And for the first time in a long while, he felt free. In the days that followed, the headlines were everywhere. Billionaire CEO under federal investigation, Miami tycoon accused of massive fraud. But Marcus Reed never read them. He didn't need to. He had seen enough that night to understand something the world often forgets. Wealth can silence the truth for a while, but it can't bury it forever. What matters isn't what a man owns. It's what he can still look at in the mirror when everything else is gone. Richard Harlow faced the consequences of his own pride. His empire crumbled. The people who once worshipped him vanished. And somewhere between courtrooms and headlines, he finally realized the weight of the word respect. Marcus never spoke about that night again. He moved quietly, found work in a small garage by the bay, fixing the cars of people who still looked him in the eyes when they said thank you. Sometimes customers recognized him. Weren't you the man from that party? They'd ask. He would only smile and say, I was the driver. But those who looked closer could see it. The kind of peace that doesn't come from victory, but from doing what's right when no one else dares. Because in the end, Marcus hadn't exposed a man. He had freed himself from one. And that was worth more than all the money in Miami. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this heart-touching story. Tell us in the comments which part moved you the most. Subscribe and turn on the bell to receive more stories that inspire and transform. Leave a like if you believe in the invisible strength of dignity and family. And above all, thank you for being part of this community that believes in stories with soul. And before you go, watch the story I leave here on the left. I'm sure it will also move you and make you reflect.